I'm a forest ranger in Montana. Something is very wrong in these woods. I've always loved the silence of the forest. That's why I became a ranger in the first place, to escape the constant noise of the city, the endless chatter of people who never seem to actually say anything. Out here in the Kootenai National Forest of northwestern Montana, silence has meaning. It speaks volumes when you know how to listen. The vast expanse of ancient pines and snow-capped mountains has been my sanctuary for nearly 2 decades now. I remember the day I first arrived, fresh out of training with my forest green uniform still stiff and uncomfortable. The regional supervisor had laughed at my wide-eyed expression as I took in the sprawling wilderness that would become my responsibility. "You city folks are all the same," he'd said, chewing on the end of his unlit pipe. "Think you know what silence is because you've spent a night camping in some state park. Trust me, kid. You don't know silence until you've spent a winter alone in these mountains." He was right, of course. That first winter taught me more about silence than my previous 30 years combined. I learned that silence isn't the absence of sound, it's a presence all its own, a living thing that breathes and shifts and communicates in ways that take years to understand. Reddit user Deepwood Wanderer once wrote, "People think forests are quiet, but they're actually full of conversation if you train yourself to listen. It's when all those conversations suddenly stop that you should start worrying." That observation has stuck with me through the years, a simple truth that saved my life more than once in predator territory. But lately, the silence has been different. My station is located at the edge of a remote section of the forest, about 40 miles from the nearest town. The cabin is small but comfortable, with a radio system for emergencies, a small kitchen, and a cozy bedroom. The front porch faces east, giving me a perfect view of the sun rising over the mountains each morning. It's the kind of postcard view tourists drive hundreds of miles to see, and I get to wake up to it every day. The cabin itself is nearly a century old, built by the Civilian Conservation Corps back in the 19th. Solid log construction with a riverstone foundation and chimney. The previous ranger, an old-timer named Harkins, had maintained it meticulously for 30 years before passing the responsibility to me. "This place will outlast us all," he'd told me during my orientation. "It's seen things you and I couldn't imagine." At the time, I'd nodded politely, assuming it was just the rambling of a man who'd spent too many winters alone in the wilderness. Now I wonder if he knew more than he let on. Each morning, I perform the same ritual: coffee on the porch as the sun breaches the eastern ridge, followed by equipment check and radio call-in to headquarters. The routine grounds me, connects me to the world beyond these woods, while still allowing me to savor the solitude that drew me here in the first place. Or at least I used to enjoy it. Now I find myself staring at the tree line, looking for something I can't quite define. It started 3 weeks ago. I was doing my regular patrol, checking for signs of illegal camping or hunting, making sure the hiking trails were clear of fallen branches. Standard stuff. The mid-June weather was perfect. Clear blue skies, temperature in the high 60s, a light breeze carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. The kind of day that reminds you why you chose this life. But as I reached the northern ridge overlooking Blackwater Lake, I noticed something strange. No birds, not a single chirp or call. The forest was completely silent. Anyone who's spent time in the wilderness knows that's not normal. Forests are alive with sound. Birds calling, insects buzzing, leaves rustling. But that day, nothing. Just a heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to press against my eardrums. I remember checking my watch, 2:17 p.m. Middle of the day, early summer. There should have been life everywhere. Instead, it felt like I was walking through a photograph. The silence was so complete that I could hear my own heartbeat, the soft creak of my leather boots, even the subtle friction of fabric as my uniform shifted with each movement. It was as if some cosmic mute button had been pressed, eliminating all ambient sound while unnaturally amplifying my own presence. I stood perfectly still, controlling my breathing, straining to detect any natural sound. Nothing, not even the whisper of wind through pine needles. The hairs on my arms stood up, that primal reaction to perceived danger that's kept our species alive for millennia. According to wilderness survival forums, unexplained silence in nature typically indicates one of 3 things: a nearby predator, an impending natural disaster, or human activity that's disrupted the ecosystem. I scanned the ridgeline for signs of mountain lions or bears, checked the sky for approaching storm clouds, and looked for any evidence of unauthorized vehicles or equipment. Nothing seemed out of place except for the silence itself. Must be a predator nearby, I told myself. A mountain lion or bear could certainly cause wildlife to go quiet. But deep down I knew this was different. This silence didn't feel like fear, it felt like absence. I continued my patrol, convincing myself I was overreacting. 20 years in these woods had made me sensitive to their patterns, but perhaps too sensitive. Maybe I was just tired. The Forest Service had been understaffed lately, leaving me to cover more ground than usual. The past winter had been particularly harsh, with record snowfall keeping the access roads closed well into May. When the snow finally melted, budget cuts meant fewer seasonal rangers were hired for the summer months. Instead of the usual team of 5 covering this sector, it was just me and occasionally Jensen, who split his time between here and Yellowstone. The isolation had never bothered me before, in fact I'd preferred it. But lately, I'd caught myself talking aloud to the trees, the rocks, anything to break the growing silence that seemed to be swallowing the forest. As a ranger, I've learned to trust my instincts. When something feels wrong in the wilderness, it usually is. But what do you do when the wrongness is something you can't identify, can't categorize, can't report in your daily logs without sounding like you're losing your mind? According to the Wilderness Awareness Institute, experienced outdoors people often report sensing danger before consciously identifying its source. Your subconscious processes environmental cues faster than your conscious mind, their manual states. That feeling of wrongness is your brain trying to tell you something important. I've always respected that wisdom, taught it to rookies and visitors alike. But what was my subconscious trying to tell me now? As I headed back to my cabin that evening, I stumbled across something that made my blood run cold. About a quarter-mile from my station, right in the middle of the main trail, was a perfect circle of dead vegetation. Every plant within a roughly 8-foot diameter was completely withered, not just damaged or dying, but desiccated, as if all moisture had been instantly sucked out of them. The strangest part, the circle had a perfectly defined edge, 1 inch, lush, healthy forest floor. The next, crumbling, gray-brown death. I've seen plenty of unusual phenomena in my years as a ranger. Fairy rings of mushrooms growing in perfect circles due to the radial growth of mycelium underground. Bare patches where lightning had struck, burning away vegetation in roughly circular patterns. Areas where chemical spills from illegal drug operations had killed the plant life. But this was different. The precision of it was unnatural. The border between life and death wasn't gradual as you'd expect with any natural process or toxin dispersal. It was as sharply defined as if someone had used a giant cookie cutter to stamp out a circle of death in the otherwise vibrant forest floor. I knelt down to examine it, careful not to touch anything. The scientific part of my brain started cataloging possibilities. Some kind of fungal infection, a chemical spill, maybe even a prank by some locals. But none of those explained the perfect circularity, or the abrupt boundary between life and death. The dead vegetation didn't appear burned, frozen, or chemically altered, just completely desiccated, as if every drop of moisture had been extracted. Even in the center of the circle where the effect should have been strongest, there was no gradient of damage. Everything was uniformly desiccated to the exact same degree. Within the circle, not a single living thing remained, no insects, no microorganisms visible to the naked eye, nothing. It was as sterile as an operating room. According to an article I'd read on the Forestry Service internal website about unusual botanical phenomena, perfect circles of dead vegetation occasionally appear in forests worldwide, often attributed to underground fungal networks or localized soil contamination. But those explanations seemed inadequate for what I was seeing. As I crouched there, I felt a prickling sensation at the back of my neck, that primal feeling of being watched. I turned quickly, scanning the forest behind me. Nothing. But for a brief moment, I thought I saw a shimmer in the air about 50 yards away, like heat rising from pavement on a summer day. By the time my eyes focused, it was gone. I blinked hard, rubbing my eyes with my knuckles. Had I actually seen something? Or was my mind playing tricks after a long day on patrol? The forest seemed to hold its breath around me, the unnatural silence intensifying as I stared into the deepening shadows between the trees. The late afternoon sun filtered through the canopy in dappled patterns, creating shifting areas of light and dark that could easily deceive the eye. That's what I told myself. Just a trick of the light, combined with fatigue and an overactive imagination primed by the discovery of the bizarre dead circle. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed, studied, measured. It was the same sensation I'd experienced once when tracking a mountain lion, that reversal of roles where you suddenly realize you've become the prey rather than the predator. The fine hairs on my arms stood up, and despite the warm June air, I felt a chill run through my body. On the popular outdoor forum Wilderness Watch, experienced hikers and rangers often share stories of forest-watching sensations. One user, Trail Veteran 63, described it perfectly. It's not like feeling watched by a person or animal. It's more like the entire forest has suddenly turned its attention to you, like you've become the focus of some vast patient consciousness. That description had always seemed poetic but overblown to me, until now. I took several photos of the circle with my digital camera, using my boot for scale. I collected soil samples from both inside and outside the perimeter, carefully placing them in separate sealed containers, standard procedure for any unusual environmental phenomena. The Ranger Handbook is clear on documentation protocols. When encountering inexplicable natural abnormalities, gather evidence methodically before disturbance can occur. That night, I reported the dead vegetation to my supervisor via radio. He didn't seem particularly concerned. Probably just a chemical leak from some illegal campers, he said dismissively. Take some samples tomorrow and we'll send them to the lab. I didn't mention the silence or the shimmer. Some things sound too crazy when said out loud, especially over a crackling radio to a bureaucrat who hasn't set foot in the actual forest for over a decade. I already collected samples, I told him. I'll send them out with the supply truck on Thursday. Good. Anything else to report? I hesitated, my finger hovering over the transmit button. Should I mention the unnatural silence? The feeling of being watched? The way the forest itself seemed to be holding its breath? No, I finally replied. Nothing else. The radio crackled with static for a moment. Then my supervisor's voice returned, already distracted. All right then, check in tomorrow, same time. After signing off, I sat at my desk reviewing the photos I'd taken. They didn't capture the eerie wrongness of the circle on the small digital screen. It just looked like a patch of dead plants. Nothing to indicate the perfect circularity or the abrupt transition between life and death. Nothing to explain the chill that ran down my spine when I'd first spotted it. According to the website forestry-knowledge.org, unexplained vegetation die-offs should be reported immediately and treated as potential biohazards. Even seemingly minor botanical anomalies can indicate serious environmental threats, the article warned. I'd followed protocol, collected samples, filed a report. By all accounts, I'd done my job. So why couldn't I shake the feeling that I'd missed something crucial? I tried to sleep that night, but couldn't. Something felt wrong about the air itself, as if the oxygen content had subtly changed. I kept getting up to look out the windows, expecting to see something, anything, but there was only darkness and the silhouettes of trees against the starlit sky. My cabin, usually a place of comfort and security, suddenly felt vulnerable. The solid log walls that had weathered decades of Montana winters now seemed flimsy and permeable. The darkness outside pressed against the windows, like something tangible, something seeking entry. I checked the locks 3 times, though in 20 years I'd rarely bothered to lock the doors at all. What was I afraid of? Not bears or mountain lions, or even the occasional lost hunter. Something else. Something I had no name for. Around 3 a.m., I heard it for the first time, a sound so faint, I initially thought I was imagining it, a low rhythmic humming, almost like chanting, but at a frequency that seemed to vibrate in my chest rather than my ears. It lasted for exactly 7 minutes. I checked my watch, then stopped as abruptly as it had begun. The sudden cessation of the sound was almost as disturbing as the sound itself. It didn't fade away as a natural sound would. It cut off instantly, as if someone had flipped a switch. One moment, the humming filled the cabin, resonating in my bones. The next, complete silence. I sat up in bed, fully alert now, listening intently for any recurrence. Nothing. Just the familiar sounds of the cabin at night, the occasional creak of settling timber, the soft tick of the old wall clock in the kitchen, the distant hoot of a great horned owl resuming its normal activities. Wait. The owl, birds, sound had returned to the forest. I crossed to the window and looked out at the moonlit trees. Something had changed. The oppressive wrongness had lifted, at least temporarily. The forest breathed again, resuming its normal nighttime conversations. Had I imagined the whole thing? The unnatural silence, the shimmer in the air, the humming. Was I finally succumbing to the isolation that had driven other rangers to request transfers back to more populated areas? The next morning I went back to the circle of dead plants with sample bags and a camera, but when I arrived at the spot, the circle was gone, not regenerated or recovered, gone. The forest floor looked completely undisturbed, as if the circle had never existed. Even the boot prints I'd left the day before had vanished. I stood there for nearly 10 minutes, doubting my own sanity. Had I somehow gone to the wrong location? No, I recognized the distinctive lightning-scarred pine to the west of the trail. This was definitely the spot. Creepypasta stories often feature this kind of reality distortion, places that appear and disappear, evidence that vanishes, making the protagonist question their grip on reality. But this wasn't fiction. This was happening to me, here in the solid, tangible world of the Kootenai National Forest. I took some soil samples anyway and snapped a few photos of the now normal forest floor. As I was about to leave, I noticed something small and metallic, partially buried under some leaves. I carefully brushed them aside and found an old tarnished silver pendant. It was an intricate design, a circle containing what looked like a stylized tree, but with branches that twisted in anatomically impossible ways, almost like they were writhing. Against my better judgment, I picked it up. It was unexpectedly heavy and cold to the touch, much colder than it should have been on a warm summer morning. As soon as my fingers closed around it, the forest went silent again. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just that same pressing, waiting silence from the day before. I quickly dropped the pendant into a sample bag. The moment it left my hand, sound returned to the forest. A chickadee called from somewhere to my right, and I could hear the faint rustling of a squirrel moving through the underbrush. I labeled the bag and put it in my pack, trying to ignore the way it seemed to grow heavier with each step back to my cabin. That evening, I called the only person I knew who might have some insight. Roberto has been the record keeper for the Flathead County Historical Society for over 30 years. He's also an amateur anthropologist with a particular interest in the indigenous cultures of the region. If anyone would recognize the pendant's design, it would be him. A twisted tree within a circle, he repeated after I described it. Doesn't sound familiar from any of the local tribal symbolism. Could be something from European settlers, maybe some kind of occult symbol. Can you send me a photo? I promised to email him one as soon as possible and hung up, feeling strangely reluctant to disconnect. Roberto's voice had been the first human sound I'd heard in days that didn't come through a staticky radio. After the call, I examined the pendant more carefully, keeping it in its sealed sample bag. The design was intricate, with tiny details that seemed to shift slightly when viewed from different angles. The tree's trunk was relatively straight, but its branches curved and twisted in ways that defied natural growth patterns. Some branches appeared to loop back into themselves, creating impossible geometries. The craftsmanship was remarkable, especially considering the apparent age of the piece. According to an article on the website, historicalartifacts.net, pendants with tree motifs were common across many cultures, often symbolizing connections between earth and sky, the underworld and the heavens. The tree as cosmic axis is a nearly universal symbol, the article stated, but the specific rendering can tell us much about the belief system of its creators. What belief system had created this twisted, impossible tree? And why had it been left precisely where the circle of dead vegetation had been? That night, I dreamed of the circle. In my dream, I was standing at its center, and the forest around me was unnaturally still. The trees seemed to be leaning inward, their branches reaching toward me like grasping hands, and beneath my feet, something was moving under the soil, something large enough to make the ground bulge and shift. I tried to run, but my feet had sunk into the earth, rooting me in place like one of the surrounding trees. The branches reached closer, their twisted forms now clearly resembling the design on the pendant. They weren't branches at all, but limbs, too many limbs, jointed in too many places, reaching for me with purpose and hunger. I woke up at exactly 3 a.m. to the same humming sound, but this time it was louder, more insistent, and this time I was certain it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the pendant, which I'd left sealed in its sample bag on my desk. The bag was vibrating slightly, moving in tiny increments across the wooden surface. The pendant inside seemed to be glowing with a faint pulsating light that somehow managed to be both silver and darkly iridescent at the same time, a color I'm not sure I could describe even if I had the words for it. I watched, paralyzed, as the bag inched closer to the edge of the desk. Part of me wanted to grab it, to stop whatever was happening, but another, more primal part kept me frozen in place. Just before the bag reached the edge, the humming stopped. The light faded. The forest outside suddenly erupted with sound, a cacophony of animal calls so loud and frenzied it sounded like panic. Something had changed. Something had shifted. And whatever it was, I knew instinctively that it was my fault. I had brought the pendant back, and in doing so, I had initiated something that should have remained dormant. As I stood at my window watching the darkness between the trees, I saw it again, that heat shimmer effect. But stronger now, more defined. For just a moment, it seemed to take shape, a tall, slender silhouette that didn't move like anything that should exist in these woods. Then it was gone, and I was left staring at empty darkness, wondering if I was losing my mind. But I know what I saw, and I know what I felt. Something is in these woods now. Something that doesn't belong. And somehow, I think it's been waiting for me to find that pendant for a very, very long time. Morning brought no relief from the uneasiness that had settled over me. I tried to convince myself that the events of the night before had been some kind of waking dream, stress-induced hallucinations from too many solo patrols and not enough human contact. But the pendant was still there, sitting innocently in its sample bag. In the light of day, it looked ordinary enough, just an old piece of silver jewelry with an unusual design. No glow, no vibration, no humming. I forced myself to follow my normal routine. Radio check-in with headquarters, equipment maintenance, review of the day's patrol route. The simple, mundane tasks helped ground me, push back against the creeping sense of wrongness. The morning broadcast from headquarters came through with the usual static and distance-induced distortion. I reported all normal, despite the growing knot in my stomach. What would I have said anyway? The forest went silent yesterday, and I found a magic pendant that glows and hums at night. That would earn me a psychological evaluation and probably a forced vacation. Instead, I listened to the daily updates, weather forecast, clear and mild, visitor alerts, a school group expected at the western trailhead, maintenance issues, bridge repairs ongoing at Eagle Creek, normal, routine information that should have been comforting, but somehow only highlighted how abnormal my own experiences had been. My patrol that day would take me along the eastern ridge, an area popular with hikers for its stunning views of the valley. As I gathered my gear, I noticed my hands were shaking slightly. I've faced down aggressive bears and rescued lost hikers in blizzard conditions. But something about that pendant and the silence in the woods had gotten under my skin in a way nothing else ever had. I decided to leave the pendant locked in my desk drawer rather than sending it to Roberto immediately. I told myself it was because I needed proper packaging materials. But the truth was, I didn't want it out of my sight, not yet. The morning was clear and cool, the kind of perfect summer day that usually filled me with energy. But as I set out on the trail, that familiar sense of wrongness returned. The forest felt different. Not silent this time, but somehow muffled, as if sounds weren't traveling quite right through the air. Birds called overhead, but their songs seemed distorted, stretched out like audio played at half speed. The rustle of leaves in the breeze reached my ears a fraction of a second after I saw the branches move, creating a disorienting lag between visual and auditory input. According to a paper published in the Journal of Wilderness Studies, sensory distortions in natural environments are often attributed to atmospheric conditions, temperature inversions, unusual humidity levels, even electromagnetic anomalies. The article suggested these phenomena might explain some folklore about thin places where the veil between worlds supposedly grows weak. I'd always dismissed such theories as pseudo-scientific attempts to explain simple meteorological effects. Now I wasn't so sure. About 2 miles into my patrol, I found the first set of tracks. I've tracked every animal native to these woods: deer, elk, bear, mountain lion, wolf. I know their prints, their movement patterns, their behaviors. These tracks didn't match anything I'd ever seen. They were roughly circular impressions, about 8 inches in diameter, with what looked like 5 appendages extending from each in a radial pattern. Not quite fingers, not quite claws, somewhere in between. The depth and spacing suggested something heavy moving on 2 legs. The stride length was enormous, easily 7 feet between impressions. I knelt to examine them more closely, careful not to disturb the surrounding soil. The impressions were deep, at least 2 inches at the center, indicating significant weight. Whatever made these was large, possibly 300 pounds or more, based on the depth and compaction of the soil. But it was the structure of the prints that truly unnerved me. They weren't paws or hooves or any recognizable animal appendage. If I had to describe them, I'd say they looked almost like starfish, a central circular pad with 5 arms radiating outward. But these weren't marine creatures, and the arms showed jointed structures, almost like fingers but too long, too thin. In 20 years as a ranger, I'd never seen anything remotely similar. The wildlife identification guides in my pack were useless. No native species matched this print pattern, not even close. On the website forestcreatures.org, there's a comprehensive database of North American animal tracks. I'd referenced it often in training new rangers, showing them how to distinguish between similar prints: bobcat versus mountain lion, coyote versus wolf. But nothing in that database resembled what I was looking at now. I photographed the tracks from multiple angles, placing my compass in the frame for scale. Then I began to follow them, curious despite my growing unease. They moved in a straight line through the forest, indifferent to the terrain, crossing streams, going up steep inclines, even seemingly passing through a thicket of dense brush without disturbing the vegetation. That last detail stopped me cold. I backtracked and examined the thicket more carefully. The tracks went in one side and came out the other, but none of the plants between showed any signs of being pushed aside or broken. It was as if whatever made these tracks had simply phased through solid matter. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead despite the mild temperature. This defied physical laws. Nothing could pass through solid objects without disturbing them. Nothing I knew of, anyway. On a forum dedicated to unexplained phenomena, uncannysightings.net, users once discussed a series of strange tracks found in Oregon's Mount Hood National Forest in 2000. The original poster, Forest Service K9, described tracks that went straight through obstacles as if they weren't there. The thread was later removed, and searching for the user's other posts showed their account had been deleted. At the time, I dismissed it as an internet hoax. Now I wasn't so sure. My radio crackled to life, making me jump. Ranger station to patrol, come in. It was Jenkins from headquarters, his voice distorted by static. I fumbled for my radio. Patrol here. Go ahead. We've had a report of hikers missing in your sector. Group of 3 should have checked in at Blackwater Campground last night but never showed. Probably just took a wrong turn. But can you swing by the trailhead and see if their vehicle is still there? Copy that. On my way. I was already turning back toward the main trail. The missing hiker's trailhead was about 4 miles from my position. As I hurried along the path, I couldn't shake the image of those tracks. Whatever made them was big, much bigger than a person, and if it could somehow move through solid objects. I pushed the thought away. Focus on the missing hikers. That's a real concrete problem with a logical explanation. Missing hikers were unfortunately common in these mountains, especially in early summer, when tourists underestimated the lingering cold at higher elevations or the rapid weather changes typical of the region. Most were found within 24 hours, cold and embarrassed but otherwise unharmed. A few required medical evacuation for exposure or injuries. Very rarely, some were never found at all. According to the Montana Search and Rescue Association's annual report, the Kootenai National Forest averaged 8 major search operations per year, with a 94% success rate in locating missing persons. Those were good odds. These hikers were probably just delayed by a broken ankle or a washed-out trail section. But as I hurried toward the trailhead, the image of those impossible tracks kept flashing in my mind. What if this disappearance wasn't like the others? What if something else was out here in my forest? I reached the trailhead parking area in just under an hour. There was only one vehicle there, a blue Subaru Outback with Washington plates. A quick check confirmed it belonged to the missing hikers. A rental car, according to the paperwork visible on the dashboard. The car was locked, with no obvious signs of distress or hurry in its parking position or contents. Through the windows I could see a cooler in the back seat, a map of the area on the passenger seat, and 3 empty coffee cups in the cup holders. Normal tourist preparations for a day hike. I radioed back to headquarters with the information, then began examining the area around the trailhead for signs of which direction they'd taken. The main trail was clear enough, with multiple sets of fresh boot prints heading into the forest. No indication of distress or hurry, just 3 people starting what they thought would be a pleasant hike. Following standard procedure, I began tracking along the trail, looking for any point where they might have deviated from the marked path. About 2 miles in, I found it, a place where the hikers had apparently left the trail and headed northeast toward Blackwater Lake, but not on any established route. Why would they go that way? The terrain was rougher, the undergrowth thicker. There were no attractions or viewpoints in that direction that would draw tourists, unless they saw something that made them curious enough to leave the safety of the marked trail. I followed their tracks through increasingly difficult terrain. They'd been moving quickly at this point, the boot prints deeper at the toe, suggesting they were almost jogging, running towards something or away from it. As I tracked the missing hikers, I noticed the forest growing quieter around me. Not the complete silence I'd experienced before, but a gradual dampening of sound, as if I were moving deeper into some acoustically insulated space. The bird calls grew fainter, then disappeared entirely. The rustle of leaves diminished, despite the steady breeze I could feel on my face. According to the website, silentplaces.org, there are natural formations that can create sound shadows in forests. Combinations of terrain, vegetation density, and atmospheric conditions that absorb or redirect sound waves. But these typically affect sounds from specific directions, not all ambient noise equally. This was different. This was a progressive withdrawal of sound, as if the forest itself were holding its breath as I approached whatever had drawn the hikers off the trail. The tracks led to a small clearing I'd never seen before, and there, in the center of the clearing, was another perfect circle of dead vegetation. My heart sank. This circle was larger than the one I'd found previously, perhaps 15 feet in diameter. And at its center, lying in a neat row, were 3 sets of hiking boots, each pair unlaced and empty, placed side by side as if their owners had carefully removed them and then walked away barefoot? But there were no barefoot tracks leading away from the circle. No tracks at all, in fact, beyond the boot prints that ended at the circle's edge. The sight triggered a memory from an old creepypasta story that had circulated among rangers years ago. The Empty Boots Trail, it was called. In the story, a ranger finds pairs of empty boots along a trail, each set containing all the clothes of the missing hikers, arranged as if the people had simply vanished while standing there. The story ended with the ranger finding his own empty boots waiting for him at the end of the trail. I shuddered at the recollection. That was fiction. This was real. I approached cautiously, fighting the urge to run in the opposite direction. The same eerie silence I'd experienced before enveloped the clearing. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of the wind in the trees. The boots were high-end hiking models, practically new. 1 small pair, likely a woman's, and 2 larger men's pairs. Beside them lay 3 backpacks, neatly arranged, their contents apparently undisturbed. I checked the packs carefully, using a stick, not my hands. I'd learned my lesson about touching things in these circles. Typical hiking gear, water bottles, trail mix, first aid kits, maps, no signs of struggle or panic. 1 pack contained a camera, a high-end digital SLR with a telephoto lens attached. I carefully extracted it with my stick and checked the most recent photos. The last image had been taken about 2 hours before their estimated disappearance, showing a young woman and 2 men, all in their 20s, smiling at the summit of Eagle Ridge, a popular viewpoint about 3 miles from this location. They looked happy, relaxed, normal. The next to last photo made my blood run cold. It showed the forest from the ridge, looking down toward where I now stood. And there, just barely visible at the edge of the frame, was a shimmer in the air. The same heat distortion effect I'd seen myself. The hikers had photographed it, probably without even realizing what was in their picture. They had seen something strange and decided to investigate, just like I would have done, just like I was doing now. It was as if the 3 hikers had simply ceased to exist, leaving their earthly possessions behind in perfect order. I took photos and GPS coordinates, then radioed headquarters with my findings. I was careful to stick to the facts. 3 missing hikers, their belongings found, no signs of the hikers themselves. I didn't mention the circle of dead vegetation or the unnatural silence. Those details would raise too many questions I couldn't answer. Jenkins instructed me to wait for the search and rescue team, which would arrive by helicopter within the hour. I agreed, though everything in me wanted to get as far from that clearing as possible. While waiting, I examined the area more carefully, staying well outside the circle's perimeter. That's when I noticed them. The same strange tracks I'd found earlier, approaching the clearing from the west, crossing directly through the circle, and continuing east. But something had changed. The tracks were larger now, the circular impressions nearly a foot in diameter, and the stride length had increased to almost 9 feet. Whatever made these tracks was growing. Creepypasta stories often feature monsters that grow stronger as they consume victims. The rake gets larger with every person it takes, one story claimed. Each disappearance adds to its mass, its power. I'd always found such concepts absurdly fictional. Now I wasn't so sure. A cold fear settled in my stomach as another realization hit me. These tracks weren't here when I arrived. They had appeared while I was examining the hikers' belongings. I was being watched. I turned slowly, scanning the forest around me. Nothing seemed out of place, but I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. Then I saw it again, that shimmer in the air, stronger now, about 30 yards to the east. It held its position for several seconds, a vaguely humanoid distortion in space that seemed to bend the light around it. According to an obscure article on the website paranormalencounters.net, there have been reports throughout history of transparency phenomena, entities that bend light around themselves, appearing as distortions rather than solid forms. The article quoted a witness from an 1887 account. It was as if the air itself had taken on a shape, like looking through disturbed water at something that wasn't quite there. That described exactly what I was seeing now. My radio screeched, a burst of static so loud it made me cry out in surprise. Through the noise, I could barely make out Jenkins' voice. "Losing your signal. Helicopter diverted. Emergency elsewhere. Return to station." The static crescendoed. Then the radio went dead. Not just out of batteries dead. It felt cold in my hand, as if all energy had been drained from it. The shimmer was moving now, drifting slowly toward me. Though it had no visible eyes, I could feel its attention fixed on me with terrible intensity. I ran. I'd like to say I followed protocol, that I secured the scene and retreated in an orderly fashion. But that would be a lie. I ran like a frightened animal, crashing through underbrush, leaping over fallen logs, my only thought to put as much distance as possible between myself and that clearing. The forest blurred around me as I ran, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. I had no sense of direction, no plan beyond escape. Years of training abandoned in a moment of primal terror. On the survival forum wildernessescape.com, experts always caution against panic running. More people die from poor decisions made in panic than from whatever caused the panic in the first place. The Ranger Handbook dedicates an entire chapter to maintaining composure in crisis situations. All useless to me now as blind fear drove me deeper into the forest. I don't know how long I ran. Long enough that my lungs burned and my legs trembled. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath, I had no idea where I was. The forest looked unfamiliar, the trees somehow wrong, too tall, too densely packed, their bark a shade darker than it should have been. Had I somehow wandered into a part of the forest I'd never seen before? Impossible. I knew these woods like the back of my hand. Every trail, every ridge, every stream. And yet nothing around me looked familiar. As my breathing slowed, I became aware of a sound, that same low humming I'd heard in my cabin, but much louder now, coming from all directions at once. The air seemed to vibrate with it, making my teeth ache and my vision blur slightly. I reached for my compass, only to find the needle spinning wildly, unable to find north. My GPS device was similarly useless, showing my location as simultaneously in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and the heart of Siberia, the coordinates changing randomly every few seconds. I was lost in a forest I'd worked in for 2 decades. According to search and rescue statistics, even experienced outdoors people who become disoriented in familiar terrain make the same critical error. They assume they couldn't possibly be lost and continue moving, often in circles, becoming increasingly disoriented. The recommended protocol is to stop, stay in place, and wait for rescue. But who would rescue me? No one knew where I was. The search and rescue team had been diverted to another emergency. Headquarters had lost my signal. The humming intensified, and with it came a pressure in my head, as if something was trying to push its way into my mind. Images flashed behind my eyes, the twisted tree symbol from the pendant, the circle of dead vegetation, and something else, something ancient and vast, that seemed to exist in more dimensions than I could comprehend. I pressed my palms against my temples, trying to block out the intrusion. "Stop," I whispered, then shouted, "Stop." And suddenly, it did. The humming ceased, the pressure vanished. The forest around me snapped back into focus. Familiar once again. I was standing on a trail I recognized, less than a mile from my cabin. Had I really run that far? Or had the forest itself somehow shifted around me, bringing me back to known territory? Neither option made logical sense, but logic seemed increasingly irrelevant in the face of what was happening. I hurried back to my cabin, constantly checking over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling that I was being herded rather than having found my own way. When I reached my cabin, I went straight to the desk drawer where I'd left the pendant. It was open, of course. The pendant was gone. In its place was a small piece of paper with a message written in an elegant, old-fashioned script. "It knows you have seen it now. Come to the Historical Society tomorrow. Bring what you found at the circle. Roberto." But I hadn't told Roberto about finding anything at the circle of dead vegetation. I hadn't told anyone. I sat heavily in my chair, staring at the note. The pendant was gone, but something new weighed down my pocket. Something I didn't remember picking up. Slowly I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small object. A carved wooden figure, roughly humanoid, but with proportions that hurt my eyes to look at directly. Its head was too large, its limbs too long, and jointed in impossible ways. I didn't remember finding this figure. I didn't remember putting it in my pocket. But somehow, I knew with cold certainty that it had been left by the hikers as an offering, and I knew that by removing it from the circle, I had done exactly what the shimmer wanted. According to an obscure anthropological text cited on the website primitiveartifacts.edu, carved figurines with deliberately distorted proportions have been found in ancient sites worldwide, often in contexts suggesting ritual significance. These objects appear to represent entities that exist outside normal physical constraints, the article suggested. The distortions may be attempts to depict higher dimensional beings in three-dimensional form. Night was falling. Outside my window the forest waited, no longer silent, but filled with wrong sounds, calls and cries that didn't belong to any animal native to these woods. And somewhere out there, growing larger with each passing hour, something was leaving tracks that defied explanation. I barricaded my door that night, for all the good it would do against something that could apparently pass through solid matter. I tried the radio repeatedly, but it remained dead, lifeless in my hands. As I sat in the growing darkness, I realized something that chilled me more than any of the impossible things I'd witnessed that day. I wasn't afraid anymore. The fear had been replaced by a growing curiosity, an almost painful need to understand what was happening in my forest. And beneath that curiosity, barely acknowledged even to myself, was a whisper of anticipation. I barely slept that night, Every sound from the forest set my nerves on edge. The creak of branches, the distant call of an owl, the soft patter of rain that began around midnight. Normal forest sounds, but they all seemed charged with new meaning, coded messages I couldn't quite decipher. The wooden figure sat on my desk where I'd placed it, its distorted proportions seeming to shift slightly when viewed from different angles. I'd covered it with a cloth after finding myself staring at it for what felt like minutes but turned out to be nearly 2 hours. According to the digital clock by my bed, it was just after 4 a.m. when the humming started again, that same low-frequency vibration that seemed to bypass my ears and resonate directly in my bones. It lasted exactly 7 minutes, then stopped abruptly, leaving behind a silence so complete I could hear the blood rushing in my veins. When dawn finally came, it brought no clarity, no sense that the events of the previous day had been a dream or hallucination. The wooden figure was still there under its cloth. The note from Roberto still sat on my desk, its elegant script as real and tangible as anything in my cabin. I made coffee and tried to think logically about what was happening. The rational explanations, toxic spores causing hallucinations, elaborate pranks by locals, undiscovered natural phenomena, all seemed woefully inadequate in the face of what I'd experienced. On the forum parkrangerstories.net, there's a thread dedicated to unexplained experiences in national forests. Most are easily dismissed as misidentifications of natural phenomena or embellished campfire tales, but some have a ring of authenticity, particularly those posted by verified rangers using their service IDs. One account, posted by Ranger MT-11278, a Montana service number, described finding perfect circles of desiccated vegetation in Glacier National Park, about 100 miles north of my location. The post was brief, matter-of-fact, with none of the dramatic flourishes typical of fabricated stories. It ended abruptly, investigated for 3 days, reassigned to different sector, not permitted to discuss further. The post was deleted within 24 hours, but had been archived by other users, sparking intense speculation. Was it genuine? If so, what had Ranger MT-11278 found that led to their reassignment, and who had ordered them to silence? By morning, I'd made a decision. I would go see Roberto as the note suggested. Whatever was happening, it was clear he knew more than he'd let on during our brief phone conversation. The Historical Society was located in the county seat, about an hour's drive from my cabin. I tried the radio one more time before leaving. Still dead. My cell phone showed no signal. As usual this deep in the forest, I would be completely on my own until I reached town. As I prepared to leave, I hesitated over what to do with the wooden figure. Every instinct told me to leave it behind. But something stronger than instinct, that same curiosity that had replaced my fear, compelled me to wrap it carefully in a bandana and place it in my jacket pocket. The drive to town was unnervingly normal. The forest gave way to scattered farms, then to the small cluster of buildings that passed for civilization in this remote corner of Montana. People went about their business, getting coffee at the local diner, checking mail at the post office, filling up at the gas station, none of them aware that just a few miles away something impossible was happening in the woods. The normalcy of town life was almost shocking after the strangeness of the forest. These people existed in a different reality than the one I'd been experiencing, a stable, predictable world where silence was just silence and trees were just trees. According to the website psychologicaldissonance.org, people who experience traumatic or inexplicable events often report feeling disconnected from ordinary social interactions afterward. There's a sense of inhabiting a different plane of existence, the article explained, of knowing something fundamental that others don't, creating an unbridgeable gap in shared reality. That described exactly how I felt watching the townspeople go about their routines. How could they just continue with their normal lives when everything I thought I understood about the world had been upended? The Flathead County Historical Society occupied an old Victorian house on the edge of town. Its white paint was peeling slightly, and the wraparound porch sagged in places, giving the whole structure a vaguely melancholic air. A small hand-lettered sign indicated the building was open, though the empty parking lot suggested visitors were few. The front door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit interior cluttered with glass display cases and framed photographs of stern-faced pioneers. According to the guest book on a small table by the entrance, I was the first visitor in 3 days. The pages before showed similarly sparse attendance, perhaps 1 or 2 names per day, mostly tourists passing through or students doing research projects. I found Roberto in his office at the back of the building, surrounded by stacks of leather-bound books and file boxes. He was older than I remembered from our few previous meetings, his hair now completely white, his face more deeply lined, but his eyes were sharp and alert as he looked up from his desk. "I've been expecting you," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him, "though not quite this soon." "You left me a note," I said, remaining standing. "At my cabin. How did you get in?" He frowned slightly. "I didn't leave any note. I haven't left this building in 3 days." I pulled the paper from my pocket and placed it on his desk. "Then how do you explain this?" Roberto examined the note, his frown deepening. "This is my handwriting," he said quietly, "or a very good imitation, but I didn't write it." A chill ran down my spine. The note mentioned bringing something I found at the circle. "I didn't tell you about finding anything there." "No, you didn't." Roberto leaned back in his chair, studying me with new intensity. "But you did find something, didn't you? And you brought it with you." I hesitated, then reached into my pocket and carefully unwrapped the wooden figure, placing it on the desk between us. Roberto made no move to touch it. "Where exactly did you find this?" I told him everything. The circle of dead vegetation, the missing hikers, the strange tracks, the shimmer in the air. As I spoke, his expression grew increasingly grave. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, then rose slowly and crossed to a locked cabinet in the corner of the office. He returned with an old book, bound in faded green leather. "I need to show you something," he said, opening the book to a marked page. "This is a journal kept by a Jesuit missionary who lived with the Kootenai tribe in the 18th. He recorded many of their stories and beliefs, including some that the tribal elders were reluctant to share." He turned the book toward me. On the page was a crude drawing that made my blood run cold. A circle of dead ground, and at its center a figure almost identical to the wooden carving I'd brought. "They called it the thinning," Roberto said quietly, "a place where the boundary between worlds grows weak. The Kootenai believed that certain entities, not gods, not demons, but something else entirely, could slip through these thin places into our world." "What kind of entities?" I asked, my mouth dry. They didn't have a name for them in any language the missionary could translate. The closest he could come was those who walk between. The Kootenai believed these entities existed in multiple realities simultaneously, and could only partially manifest in our world. Hence the distortion effect you described. The missionary's journal included detailed accounts of tribal rituals designed to seal these thin places and drive back the entities that emerged from them. The ceremonies involved specific arrangements of stones, sacred herbs burned in precise patterns, and chants in a language that even the Kootenai of that time considered ancient. According to the journal, these rituals had been performed for countless generations, maintaining the boundary between worlds. But with the arrival of European settlers and the subsequent disruption of tribal practices, the rituals became less frequent, less complete. The last recorded ceremony was performed in 1891, Roberto said, turning to a later page in the journal. After that, the knowledge was lost, or deliberately suppressed by government and church officials who saw it as pagan superstition. The journal's final entry was ominous. The elders warned that without the rituals, the thin places will grow more numerous, the boundaries weaker. They speak of a time when the entities will find a way to create a permanent opening, a convergence of multiple thin places that will allow full manifestation in our world. I thought of the shimmer I'd seen in the forest, the way it had seemed to grow more substantial, more defined with each appearance. "What do they want?" I asked. Roberto closed the book carefully. "According to the Kootenai, they want what any invasive species wants: territory. They start with small incursions, single entities that create thin places. These act as anchors, allowing more of their kind to cross over. Eventually, the thin places expand and merge. And then what happens? The laws of physics as we understand them begin to break down in those areas. Our reality gets overridden. I sat back, trying to process what he was telling me. You believe all this? That some interdimensional beings are trying to invade through my forest? What I believe doesn't matter, Roberto said. But something left that note in my handwriting. Something is creating perfect circles of dead vegetation. Something left tracks that pass through solid objects. He nodded at the wooden figure. And something compelled those hikers to leave that as an offering. How do you know it was an offering? Because there have been others. Roberto opened a drawer in his desk and removed a cloth-wrapped bundle. He unwrapped it carefully to reveal 5 more wooden figures, each similar to mine, but with subtle differences in their proportions and details. These have been found at various locations throughout the county over the past 6 months, he explained, always in or near circles of dead vegetation, always placed in neat arrangements, as if left deliberately. The people who find them feel compelled to pick them up, to bring them home, and then strange things start happening around them. On the website artifactcollectors.net, there's a thread about compulsion objects, items that create an irresistible urge to possess them. Most of the discussion is clearly about normal collector psychology, the human tendency to acquire interesting or unusual items, but some posts describe a more literal compulsion, an almost supernatural need to take and keep certain objects despite negative consequences. One user, Antiquarian Scholar, wrote, "There are objects that want to be found, that manipulate human psychology to ensure they end up exactly where they're meant to be." The post received mostly skeptical responses, but a few users shared similar experiences with items that seemed to exert an unusual influence over their discoverers. What kind of strange things? I asked Roberto. Electronics malfunctioning, pets disappearing, time seeming to skip or stretch, and always a growing obsession with the forests, the hills, the wild places where the circles appear. I thought of my dead radio, my malfunctioning GPS, the way I'd found myself staring at the wooden figure for hours without realizing it, the curiosity that had replaced my fear. Why are you telling me this? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Because it's accelerating, Roberto said grimly. 6 months ago, we found the first figure. A month later, 2 more. Last month, 5. And now yours. The incursions are becoming more frequent. The thin places more numerous. He showed me a map of the county where he'd marked the locations of all known circles and figure discoveries. The pattern was striking. The incidents formed a rough spiral centering on Blackwater Lake, the very spot where I'd first noticed the unnatural silence in the forest. And the hikers, what happened to them? Roberto's expression darkened. There have been others who disappeared. Not just the 3 you found evidence of. 17 people have gone missing in these forests in the past 6 months. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just empty clothes, neatly arranged, and sometimes one of these figures left behind. Why hasn't this made the news? Why isn't there a massive search operation? Because each disappearance seems isolated, explainable. Hikers get lost in remote woods all the time. Animals attack. People fall into ravines. The authorities investigate, find nothing conclusive, and eventually the cases go cold. He leaned forward. And those of us who try to connect the dots, to point out the pattern, we're dismissed as conspiracy theorists or attention seekers. I thought of my supervisor's dismissive response when I reported the circle of dead vegetation. Just a chemical leak. Take some samples. Nothing to worry about. According to the website missingpersonsstatistics.org, northwestern Montana has one of the highest per capita rates of unsolved disappearances in the country. Most are attributed to the vast wilderness, harsh conditions, and prevalence of large predators. But the actual number of recovered bodies is unusually low compared to similar regions, a statistical anomaly that has never been adequately explained. What about the pendant? I asked. The silver one with the twisted tree design. I found it near the first circle, but it disappeared from my cabin. Roberto went very still. You found the anchor? The what? The anchor. It's described in some of the oldest Kootenai stories. A silver pendant bearing the sign of the twisted tree, supposedly created by those who first sealed the thin places centuries ago. He quickly pulled another book from his shelves. This one a collection of transcribed oral histories gathered from tribal elders in the early 19th. He flipped through the pages until he found what he was looking for, a detailed description of a silver pendant that matched exactly what I'd found. According to the account, the pendant had been created by a powerful medicine person who had learned to communicate with the entities and negotiate boundaries. The pendant served as a physical anchor for these agreements, a focal point that strengthened the natural barriers between worlds. Sealed them. So there's a way to close these incursions? Theoretically, yes. The stories say the anchor was used to bind the thin places, to strengthen the barriers between worlds. But it was lost over 100 years ago when the last person who knew how to use it died without passing on their knowledge. I felt a surge of hope, quickly followed by confusion. But if it's so important, why would the entity take it from my cabin? Wouldn't they want to keep it away from humans who might use it against them? Roberto shook his head slowly. Unless what? Unless they need it too. The anchor works both ways according to the stories. It can seal the barriers, or it can break them completely. The implications hit me like a physical blow. So these things have been looking for the anchor all this time, and I just happened to find it? I don't think anything about this is happenstance, Roberto said quietly. I think you were led to it, chosen somehow. Why me? That, he said, is what we need to find out. He rose and crossed to a filing cabinet, returning with a folder bulging with papers. These are all the accounts I've been able to gather of similar phenomena throughout the region's history. Disappearances, circles of dead vegetation, strange tracks, visual distortions. They go back over 200 years. He spread the papers on the desk between us, and in many of these accounts there's mention of a sentinel, a human who becomes aware of the incursion early, who feels drawn to investigate rather than flee. A sentinel, I repeated, the word feeling strangely right in my mouth. And what happens to these sentinels? Roberto met my eyes directly. Most of them disappear eventually, but a few find a way to push back, to seal the thin places before they can spread. How? That's what we need to discover. He gestured to the stacks of books surrounding us. The answer is here somewhere, buried in these old stories and accounts. We just need to find it before... He was interrupted by a low, rhythmic humming that seemed to emanate from the wooden figure on the desk, the same humming I'd heard in the forest, in my cabin. The figure was vibrating slightly, inching across the polished wood surface, just as the pendant in its bag had done. Roberto and I both stepped back. It's never done that before, he whispered. The humming grew louder, and with it came that pressure in my head, the sense of something trying to push into my mind. But this time, I didn't fight it. I let it come, curious despite my fear. Images flooded my consciousness, the forest seen from impossible angles, the circles of dead vegetation pulsing with dark energy, the shimmer taking more substantial form, and beneath it all, a question, repeated over and over in a voice that wasn't quite a voice. Where is the anchor? Where is the anchor? Where is the anchor? I don't have it, I said aloud. You took it. Roberto looked at me in alarm. Who are you talking to? I ignored him, focusing on the presence in my mind. Why do you need it? What are you trying to do? The response came not in words but in a series of overwhelming sensations. Hunger, desperation, a longing so intense it was almost painful. And beneath it all, a vast, ancient patience suddenly giving way to urgent need. Time running out. Barrier thinning. Need the anchor. Need you. Need me for what? I demanded, both aloud and in my mind. The humming stopped abruptly. The wooden figure went still. The presence withdrew from my mind, leaving behind a single crystal-clear image, the northern ridge of Blackwater Lake, where I had first noticed the silence in the forest. But changed now, the trees twisted into impossible shapes, the sky above fractured like shattered glass, showing glimpses of something else beyond, something vast and dark and hungry. I gasped, staggering back. Roberto caught my arm, steadying me. What just happened? He asked urgently. It spoke to me, I said, my voice shaking. Or communicated somehow. It needs the anchor for something, and it needs me. What did it show you? I described the vision of the transformed ridge. Roberto's face paled. The convergence, he whispered. When multiple thin places merge into one larger incursion. If that happens, then what? Then the barrier doesn't just thin, it breaks, permanently. I looked down at the wooden figure, now innocuous and still on the desk. It's happening at Blackwater Lake, tonight. How do you know? I just know. The certainty had been planted in my mind along with the vision, and I have to be there. That's exactly what it wants, Roberto warned. It's manipulating you, using that connection it's established. Maybe, I conceded. But what choice do we have? If you're right about all this, if the barrier between worlds is about to break permanently, someone has to try to stop it. And you think that someone is you, a forest ranger with no special powers or knowledge. I'm the one it's been communicating with. I'm the one who found the anchor in the first place. I met his gaze steadily. And I'm the one who's going with or without your help. Roberto held my stare for a long moment, then sighed heavily. You'll need to know what to look for, he said, turning back to his books. If there's a way to seal the thin places without the anchor, it will be in these old accounts somewhere. According to the website ritualpractices.org, many indigenous ceremonies across North America share common elements when dealing with boundaries or thresholds. Circular patterns, purification by smoke or fire, invocations that establish clear delineations between separate domains. The site speculates that these similarities might reflect universal human psychological patterns, but acknowledges they could also indicate responses to shared experiences now lost to history. We spent the next several hours poring over yellowed pages and faded photographs, looking for anything that might help me understand what I was facing and how to stop it. Outside, the day slipped away, shadows lengthening as afternoon gave way to evening. Finally, Roberto found something, a journal entry from 1879, written by a trapper who claimed to have witnessed a door between worlds closing. He describes a ritual, Roberto said, excitement coloring his voice. Something the local tribe performed at a circle of dead ground. They used fire and some kind of powder, probably a mixture of herbs and minerals, to create a barrier around the circle. Did it work? According to him, yes. The shimmer in the air collapsed in on itself and vanished. The vegetation began to recover within days. The trapper's account included a rough transcription of the chant used in the ritual, a phonetic approximation of words in a language he didn't understand. Roberto recognized elements of ancient Kootenai, though much of it remained untranslatable. It wasn't much, but it was something. Roberto hastily copied down the details of the ritual, then disappeared into another room, returning with a small leather pouch. I've been collecting the components mentioned in these accounts, he explained, handing me the pouch. Just in case, there should be enough here for one ritual. The pouch contained a mixture of dried herbs, sage, sweetgrass, and others I didn't recognize, along with small amounts of various minerals, iron filings, crushed turquoise, and what looked like powdered bone. The iron represents boundaries, Roberto explained. The turquoise is for protection. The bone, well, that's from the original practitioner, a physical connection to those who performed the ritual successfully before. I took the pouch, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of what I was planning to do. What if it doesn't work? What if I'm just walking into a trap? Roberto's expression was grim. Then at least we'll know, and I'll make sure others do too. He handed me a small digital voice recorder. Document everything. If you don't come back, I'll make sure people hear your story. The sun was setting as I left the historical society, the leather pouch heavy in one pocket, the recorder in another, and the wooden figure which I couldn't bring myself to leave behind wrapped once more in its bandana and tucked securely in an inner pocket of my jacket. As I drove back toward the forest, the lights of the small town receding in my rearview mirror, I felt a strange sense of calm. Fear still fluttered at the edges of my consciousness, but it was overshadowed by that same inexplicable curiosity and anticipation I'd felt before. Part of me wondered if these feelings were even my own anymore, or if they had been planted there by whatever was waiting for me in the woods. But another part, a deeper part, knew that I had been moving toward this moment from the first day I became a ranger, that somehow, this had always been my purpose. The forest welcomed me back with unnatural silence, the trees standing sentinel in the gathering darkness, and somewhere ahead at the northern ridge of Blackwater Lake, something was waiting for me, something that had crossed between worlds to find me. I just hoped I would be strong enough to send it back. The forest had changed. Even in the dimming light of dusk, I could see it immediately. The trees were the same species: lodgepole pine, Douglas fir, western larch, but their forms had subtly altered. Branches twisted at angles that defied natural growth patterns. Trunks leaned toward each other as if sharing secrets. Roots erupted from the ground only to plunge back down in writhing coils. The familiar paths I'd walked for years now seemed to shift in my peripheral vision, straightening when I looked directly at them, only to bend again when my gaze moved on. Distance became unreliable. Landmarks that should have been miles apart appeared within minutes of each other, while a simple stream crossing stretched into an hour-long journey. I activated the voice recorder as I walked, documenting everything I saw. If I didn't return, at least Roberto would have some record of what had happened. "The air feels thicker," I spoke into the recorder, "harder to move through, as if the atmosphere itself is becoming more dense. Temperature is dropping rapidly. Should be around 65 degrees this time of year, but it feels closer to 40 now." Each word seemed to hang in the air after I spoke it, vibrating slightly before slowly dissipating. Sound itself behaved strangely, sometimes traveling too far, sometimes not far enough. My own footsteps alternated between eerily silent and unnaturally loud, with no apparent pattern to the changes. According to an article on the website acousticanomalies.org, sound distortion is often reported in locations associated with paranormal activity. The scientific explanation involves temperature inversions or unusual atmospheric density creating acoustic lensing effects. But the article acknowledged that some cases defy conventional explanation, particularly when the distortions affect only certain sounds or follow patterns that suggest intentionality. I consulted my compass, unsurprised to find the needle spinning aimlessly. My watch had stopped at 7:17, though whether that was AM or PM, I couldn't say for certain. The sky above had darkened not to the deep blue of evening, but to a strange mottled purple-black, like a bruise spreading across the heavens. Stars appeared, but in configurations I didn't recognize. The familiar constellations of the northern hemisphere, the Big Dipper, Cassiopeia, Orion, were gone, replaced by clusters and patterns that seemed to shift subtly when I tried to focus on them. Despite the disorientation, I knew I was heading in the right direction. The wooden figure in my pocket seemed to grow warmer the closer I got to my destination, pulsing with a heat that matched the rhythm of my heartbeat. The humming started again as I approached the northern ridge of Blackwater Lake, that low, vibrating tone that seemed to exist at the threshold of hearing. With it came the pressure in my head, but different now, more focused, almost eager. I crested the ridge and stopped dead. Below me, the lake had transformed. What had once been a pristine alpine lake, its clear waters reflecting the surrounding mountains, was now a roiling mass of oily black liquid. The surface bulged and shifted as if something massive moved beneath it. And around the shore, arranged in a perfect circle encompassing the entire lake, were dozens of figures, human figures, standing unnaturally still, their backs to the water, facing outward like sentinels, or offerings. I raised my binoculars with trembling hands. The figures were people, hikers, rangers, locals I recognized from town, and all of them stood in exactly the same position, arms slightly raised from their sides, heads tilted back, eyes open but unseeing. Among them I spotted the 3 missing hikers whose boots and backpacks I'd found. They were barefoot, dressed in the same clothes they'd been wearing when they disappeared, but their garments were now stained with a black substance that glistened wetly in the strange light. "Oh God," I whispered into the recorder. "There must be 30 people down there, all the missing persons. They're not dead, but they're not present, either. It's like they're in some kind of trance." At the water's edge, directly across from my position, stood something else. Something tall and slender, its proportions wrong in a way that hurt to look at directly. It wasn't quite a shimmer anymore. It had substance now, a physical presence that bent the light around it, but no longer passed through it. "The entity has manifested more fully," I continued, forcing clinical detachment into my voice. "Approximately 8 feet tall, humanoid in basic shape, but the limbs are too long, jointed in too many places. The head is—" I faltered. The head was changing as I watched, cycling through different forms as if trying to decide on one. Human faces appeared and disappeared. Some I recognized, others strangers, animals, geometric shapes, and sometimes, briefly, nothing at all, just a void where a head should be. According to the website dimensionaltheory.net, theoretical physicists have proposed that higher dimensional objects passing through our three-dimensional reality would appear to change shape unpredictably. Imagine a four-dimensional sphere passing through a three-dimensional plane, the article explained. At each moment we would see only a three-dimensional slice of the object, with the apparent shape changing continuously, as different parts of the higher dimensional whole intersect with our reality. The wooden figure in my pocket was hot now, almost burning against my thigh. I pulled it out, gasping at the sensation. It had changed too, the crude carving now intricately detailed, an exact miniature of the entity by the lake. As I held it, the humming intensified, and suddenly I understood. The figures weren't just offerings, they were anchors of a different kind, physical links that helped the entities maintain their presence in our reality. And I was holding one. The realization hit me with physical force. I was connected to the entity below, had been since I picked up the wooden figure. Every time I'd felt that curiosity instead of fear, that anticipation instead of dread, it had been the entity's emotions bleeding into mine through the connection. I was being manipulated, used, prepared for something. I almost dropped the figure then, almost turned and fled back the way I'd come. But a new sensation stopped me. A cold weight against my chest, under my shirt. I reached up and felt something metallic pressing against my skin. Slowly I unbuttoned my shirt enough to look down. There, hanging from a silver chain I'd never seen before, was the pendant, the anchor, the one that had disappeared from my cabin. It had found its way back to me, or I had found my way back to it. The entity by the lake went still. Though it had no eyes I could discern, I felt its attention shift, focusing on me with laser intensity. It knew I had the anchor now. The pressure in my head became unbearable. Images and sensations flooding my consciousness too quickly to process. Fragments of knowledge, glimpses of a world or worlds beyond our own. And through it all, that same desperate hunger, that need. Bring it. Bring the anchor. Complete the convergence. The voice that wasn't a voice reverberated through my mind, compelling me forward. My feet began moving of their own accord, carrying me down the ridge toward the lake, toward the circle of entranced humans, toward the waiting entity. I fought against the compulsion, focusing on Roberto's voice in my memory. It's manipulating you, using that connection. The leather pouch felt heavy in my pocket. The ritual. I had to perform the ritual before I lost control completely. With enormous effort, I forced myself to stop walking. My body shook with the strain of resisting the entity's will. I fumbled with the pouch, withdrawing the mixture of herbs and minerals Roberto had prepared. The ritual requires a circle of ash, I gasped into the recorder, fighting to maintain my own thoughts. Need to create a barrier between me and the entity. I managed to collect fallen branches and quickly built a small fire, using my ranger's kit to get it started. As the flames caught, I began sprinkling Roberto's mixture into the fire. It popped and hissed, the flames changing color from orange to blue to a deep, vibrant purple. The humming rose to a painful pitch. The entity by the lake moved for the first time, its impossible limbs carrying it forward with unsettling grace. Around the lake, the entranced humans turned as one, their vacant eyes now fixed on me. The purple flames cast an eerie light over the transformed landscape, deepening shadows and creating shifting patterns that seemed almost like writing in an unknown alphabet. The mixture Roberto had given me produced a thick aromatic smoke that coiled around me like a living thing, seeming to respond to my movements and breathing. Working quickly, I used a burning branch to draw a circle of ash around myself, making it as perfect as I could manage with shaking hands. As the circle closed, something remarkable happened. The pressure in my head eased slightly, not gone completely, but reduced, as if I'd put a thin wall between myself and the entity's influence. It's working, I breathed into the recorder. The ash circle is providing some protection. According to the website protectivecircles.org, circular barriers appear in protective rituals across virtually all human cultures. The circle is a universal symbol of containment and boundary, the site explained. By creating an unbroken circular perimeter, practitioners symbolically and sometimes literally create a space where different rules apply, where outside influences can be controlled or excluded. But my relief was short-lived. The entity continued its approach, and with each step it took, its form became more substantial, more defined. The cycling faces slowed, settling more and more frequently on one particular visage, one that sent ice through my veins when I recognized it. My own face. Around the lake, the entranced humans had begun to move as well, walking with the same unsettling grace as the entity, their movements synchronized into perfect unison. They were coming for me. All of them. I didn't have much time. According to the journal Roberto had found, the next step was to recite an incantation while holding the anchor, the pendant above the flames. But the pendant was now burning cold against my skin, so cold it felt like it was freezing to my flesh. With a cry of pain, I tore it from my neck, the silver chain snapping easily. The moment it left my skin, the entity by the lake faltered, its form briefly destabilizing into that familiar shimmer before solidifying again. There was a connection there, I realized. The anchor, the pendant, was linked to the entity somehow. It wasn't just a tool to open or close the barriers between worlds. It was a part of the entity itself. Or perhaps it was the other way around. Perhaps the entity was an extension of the anchor, a probe sent through the thin place to recover what had been lost. I held the pendant over the purple flames, my hand shaking with cold and fear. The incantation Roberto had copied down was in a language I didn't recognize, perhaps Kootenai, perhaps something older. The words felt strange in my mouth, as if my tongue and lips weren't quite the right shape to form them properly. Each syllable seemed to have weight and substance, vibrating in the air after I spoke it. Some sounds made the flames leap higher, others caused them to dim momentarily. I began to recite the unfamiliar words, stumbling over the pronunciation. The pendant grew colder still, the metal taking on that same strange iridescence I'd seen before. Silver but also darkly prismatic, reflecting colors that had no name in human language. The humming changed pitch, becoming discordant, almost panicked. The entity's movements became more urgent, its steps covering impossible distances. The entranced humans broke into a run, converging on my position from all sides. According to the folklore website boundaryrituals.com, the final moments of successful containment ceremonies often involve a crisis point, where the practitioner faces maximum resistance. The entity, recognizing the threat of containment, typically marshals all available resources for one final attempt to break the ritual, the article explained. This is the most dangerous moment, where many historical accounts describe practitioners faltering or being overwhelmed. I spoke faster, the foreign syllables tumbling from my lips. The pendant began to vibrate in my grasp, the twisted tree symbol at its center seeming to writhe and shift. Just as I spoke the final word of the incantation, several things happened simultaneously. The circle of ash around me erupted into purple flame, rising 6 feet high in an instant. The pendant shattered in my hand, fragments of silver embedding themselves in my palm. The entity reached the edge of my flaming circle, its form now almost completely identical to my own, like a mirror image crafted from wrong angles and too many joints. And the wooden figure in my pocket burst into flame, the fire consuming it in seconds without burning my clothing. A shockwave emanated from the broken pendant, rippling outward in a visible distortion of air. When it reached the flaming circle, the fire changed again, shifting from purple to a deep midnight blue. When it reached the entity, the creature's form destabilized completely, dissolving into a cloud of shimmering particles. And when it reached the entranced humans, they collapsed like puppets with cut strings. The pressure in my head vanished so abruptly it left me dizzy. The humming stopped. The strange mottled sky above began to clear, stars appearing one by one in the familiar pattern I'd known all my life. I stood in my circle of blue flame, blood dripping from my hand where the silver fragments had cut into my flesh, and watched as reality reasserted itself around me. The lake returned to normal, the oily black substance receding to reveal clear water beneath. The twisted trees straightened, their branches returning to natural configurations. The air thinned, becoming easier to breathe. I had done it. I had closed the thin place, sealed the barrier between worlds. Or so I thought, until I felt the silver fragments in my palm begin to move, burrowing deeper into my flesh like living things seeking shelter. I cried out, trying to shake them free, but they had already disappeared beneath my skin, leaving no wounds, no blood, no evidence they had ever been there except for the memory of pain. And as the blue flames died down around me, I heard it, faint but unmistakable. The humming had returned, but it was no longer coming from outside. It was coming from within me. I raised the recorder to my lips one last time, my voice steady despite the realization dawning on me. The ritual worked, but not in the way I expected. The entity is gone, but the anchor, I swallowed hard. The anchor is now a part of me. I can feel it, the fragments moving through my body, settling into place. I looked down at my hand, at the unblemished skin where moments before there had been bleeding cuts. Already, I could feel something changing inside me, a subtle shift in perception that made the world around me seem slightly less real, slightly less solid. I don't think I closed the thin place, I whispered into the recorder. I think I became it. Around me, the fallen humans were beginning to stir, groaning as they returned to consciousness. They would need help, medical attention. I should radio for emergency services, organize an evacuation. But a new thought was forming in my mind, a thought that didn't feel entirely like my own. They are not ready yet, but they will be, in time. I switched off the recorder and pocketed it. Then I began making my way down to the shore, to the waking victims of an incursion they would never fully remember or understand. Behind me, where the circle of blue flame had been, a perfect ring of silver grass now grew, a thin place, centered on me, waiting to open. 2 weeks have passed since the night at Blackwater Lake. On the surface, everything has returned to normal. The forest is alive with natural sounds again. Birds calling, insects buzzing, leaves rustling in the wind. The search and rescue operation was a success, with all 32 missing people recovered alive if disoriented and suffering from exposure and dehydration. The official explanation is mass hysteria triggered by toxic spores from an unusual fungal bloom near the lake, a convenient theory that explains the shared hallucinations reported by the victims, their strange behavior, and the temporary fugue states that led them into the wilderness. No one remembers the entity. No one remembers the circle of dead vegetation, the wooden figures, the shimmer in the air. No one except me. And Roberto, of course, though he's been suspiciously quiet since I returned the voice recorder to him. He listened to my account once, his face growing paler with each passing minute. When the recording ended, he simply nodded, locked it in his desk drawer, and asked me not to contact him again unless absolutely necessary. "The less I know about what you're becoming," he said, "the safer I'll be." Those words have haunted me these past weeks, because I do feel myself becoming something else. The silver fragments of the anchor continue to move beneath my skin, spreading throughout my body in a slow, deliberate pattern. I can feel them tracing lines along my nerves, clustering around my spine, gathering behind my eyes. They bring changes, subtle at first, now increasingly pronounced. I can see the thin places now, without needing circles of dead vegetation to mark them. They're everywhere, shimmering patches in the air where reality stretches thin, usually no larger than a dinner plate and lasting only seconds before sealing themselves. Natural fluctuations in the barrier between worlds, happening all around us, all the time, unnoticed by ordinary people. According to the website thresholdphenomena.org, cultures worldwide have concepts of places where the boundary between worlds is naturally thinner. Fairy rings in European folklore, spirit paths in various indigenous traditions, ley lines in New Age belief systems. The site suggests these might be cultural interpretations of a genuine phenomenon, though it offers no scientific explanation for what that phenomenon might be. I can hear the humming constantly now, a background frequency that rises and falls with the strength of these natural thin places. It no longer hurts or pressures my mind. Instead, it feels like coming home, like returning to a conversation I've been missing all my life. And sometimes, in dreams or in moments of deep quiet, I catch glimpses of the other side, fractured images of a vast, incomprehensible reality operating under laws that make no sense to my human mind, a place of endless possibility and constant change, where thought and matter are indistinguishable from one another. On the forum dimensionaldreaming.net, users share experiences of what they call membrane dreams, vivid visions of realities operating under different physical laws. Most posts are clearly describing ordinary dreams embellished with pseudoscientific terminology, but some accounts contain details so specific, so consistently reported across different users with no apparent connection to each other, that they give me pause. One user, Quantum Observer, described experiencing a reality where time and space are completely malleable, where consciousness shapes environment directly, where entities exist as patterns rather than fixed forms. The description matches aspects of what I glimpse in my own increasingly frequent visions. I haven't tried to cross over, not yet, but I know I could if I wanted to. The anchor inside me is the key, not just to closing the thin places, but to opening them, to controlling them. The people from the lake have all returned to their lives, with no memory of what truly happened to them. The hikers went back to Washington. The locals returned to their jobs in town. Except for me. I've taken an extended leave of absence from the Forest Service, citing trauma from the rescue operation. My supervisor was surprisingly understanding. Perhaps he sensed the change in me, the subtle wrongness that makes people slightly uncomfortable in my presence now. When I look in the mirror, I still see my own face, but there's something different in the eyes, a depth that wasn't there before, as if I'm looking at the world from much further away than just behind my own retinas. My colleagues notice it too, though they can't articulate what's changed. They maintain a slightly greater physical distance than before, an unconscious response to some animal instinct warning them that I'm not quite what I appear to be. According to the website subtleshifts.com, humans are remarkably sensitive to minor changes in familiar faces, detecting alterations in expression, micro-movements, and gaze direction with surprising accuracy. We evolved to be exquisitely attuned to face perception, the article explained. When something is even slightly off about a familiar face, we register it immediately, even if we can't consciously identify what's changed. I spend my days in the forest, mapping the thin places, learning their patterns. They're more common at dawn and dusk, more numerous during electrical storms, almost non-existent under the full moon. They appear most often in wild places, away from human habitation, but occasionally I find them in town, in the cemetery, in the basement of the old church, once even in the freezer section of the local grocery store. And everywhere I go I feel the pull of the other side, the entity's world reaching for mine like gravity, like magnetism, like love. I haven't told anyone about the silver whorls that have begun to appear on my skin, delicate patterns that trace the path of the fragments beneath, forming an intricate map of what might be constellations in some alien sky or the neural pathways of a vast, inhuman mind. The patterns are most pronounced along my arms and across my chest, spiraling outward from the point where the pendant shattered against my palm. They're barely visible in normal light, just a slight iridescence like mother of pearl, but under moonlight or UV illumination, they glow with that same unnameable color I saw in the pendant, somewhere between silver and darkly prismatic. According to the website metallicdermatosis.org, there are rare medical conditions where metallic compounds become embedded in the skin, creating distinctive patterns. Most are the result of industrial accidents or unusual chemical exposures. None describe patterns that move and change over time, that respond to phases of the moon or proximity to thin places. I haven't told anyone about the moments when my perception shifts, when I see people not as solid beings but as complex patterns of energy and probability, their past and future states overlapping with their present forms. In these moments, linear time dissolves. I see a person's entire existence simultaneously, their birth, growth, aging, and death, all superimposed like frames in a film projected all at once. I see the countless decision points that shaped their path, the alternative versions that might have existed had different choices been made. And I certainly haven't told anyone about the night I found myself standing in my cabin, holding a small piece of wood I'd been absently carving into a crude humanoid figure with wrong proportions and too many joints. I burned it immediately, of course. I'm not ready to create anchors of my own. Not yet. But the knowledge is there, buried in the silver fragments coursing through my system. The knowledge of how to thin the barriers, how to create doorways, how to prepare humans for what? Contact? Transformation? Transcendence? I still don't know what the entity wanted, what it planned to do with the 32 people it had gathered around the lake. Was it trying to bring them over to its reality, or was it trying to establish a foothold in ours? And which am I doing now as I walk these woods with the anchor inside me, as I map the thin places and learn their patterns? Am I protecting this world or preparing it for something else? According to the website boundarytheory.edu, maintained by a fringe group of theoretical physicists, the universe may be constantly interacting with adjacent realities in ways we can't normally perceive. The boundaries between parallel universes may be permeable, the site suggests. Quantum fluctuations at these boundaries could allow for momentary connections, with information or even physical laws occasionally bleeding through. The question haunts me, especially in the pre-dawn hours, when I find myself standing at the northern ridge of Blackwater Lake, watching the thin places shimmer above the water like stars reflected in its surface. On my last visit, I found a small wooden figure waiting for me on the shore, crude but recognizable, a humanoid form with my proportions, my features, an offering, or perhaps a warning. I didn't burn this one. I keep it on the desk in my cabin, next to my ranger badge and the voice recorder with my account of that night. A reminder of what happened, of what is still happening. Today marks the 2-week anniversary of the convergence, and I've made a decision. The pattern of thin places has been growing stronger, more coherent. They're forming a larger design across the forest, a symbol that would be recognizable if viewed from above, a twisted tree within a circle. Tonight, there will be an electrical storm. The forecast calls for severe thunderstorms across the county, with the center of the system passing directly over Blackwater Lake. The thin places will be numerous, powerful. I could stop it. I know how now. The knowledge is in the silver fragments, in the pattern they've etched into my nervous system. I could use the anchor within me to seal all the thin places permanently, to strengthen the barrier between worlds so that nothing could ever cross over again. But I'm not going to. Because the truth is, I no longer believe the entity was trying to invade. I think it was trying to communicate, to establish a connection between realities that were never meant to be separate in the first place. The anchor isn't a weapon or a key, it's a translator, a bridge builder, and now that it's a part of me, I can feel the rightness of what's coming, the convergence not of one reality overtaking another, but of boundaries dissolving to reveal a greater whole. The people at the lake weren't victims or sacrifices. They were pioneers, the first to be prepared for a wider reality, and they will be again, once I complete what the entity started. Roberto would call me compromised, I know. He would say the anchor has changed me, that I'm no longer thinking with a human mind, and perhaps he's right. But I've seen the other side now, glimpsed the vastness waiting beyond the thin places, and it's beautiful. Terrifying, yes, but beautiful in its complexity, its endlessness, its utter freedom from the limitations of a single perspective. Tonight, I will return to Blackwater Lake. I will stand at its center as the storm breaks overhead and the thin places multiply, and I will use the anchor as it was meant to be used, not to separate, but to connect. According to the website apocalypticnarratives.org, which analyzes end-of-world scenarios across different cultures, a common theme in modern cosmic horror is the protagonist who ultimately embraces the very thing they initially feared. The true horror lies not in the alien presence, the site suggests, but in the recognition that the human perspective is woefully limited, that what we perceive as monstrous may simply be beyond our capacity to comprehend. There will be others drawn to the lake tonight. I can feel them already, moving through the forest, answering a call they don't consciously hear, some from town, some from farther away, all with a part to play in what comes next. I've left this record in my cabin, along with the wooden figure and Roberto's voice recorder. Perhaps someone will find them someday, and understand what happened here. Perhaps they'll try to stop the next convergence, to reseal the barriers I'm about to thin. But I don't think they'll succeed. Because once the way is opened, once people have experienced the freedom of existing between worlds, they won't want to go back. I certainly don't. The silver patterns have reached my face now. delicate whorls spiraling from my eyes like an intricate mask. When I look in the mirror, I sometimes catch a glimpse of something else looking back, not the entity as it was by the lake, but something new, something that is neither fully it nor fully me, but a synthesis of both. The storm is approaching. I can hear the thunder in the distance, feel the air charging with electricity. The humming is growing louder, more insistent. It's time. If you're reading this, if you've come looking for the ranger who disappeared during the strange events at Blackwater Lake, know that I'm not lost. I'm exactly where I need to be, in the thin place between worlds, helping others find their way across. The forest isn't wrong anymore. It's simply becoming more than it was, as am I. And if you feel a strange curiosity drawing you into the woods, if you find yourself staring at the trees and sensing something more behind them, don't be afraid. It's just the anchor calling you home. After all, the barriers between worlds were never meant to last forever. They're thinning all around you, even now. Can you hear the humming yet? The ranger's journal was found 3 months after the events at Blackwater Lake. The cabin stood empty, ranger badge still on the desk, voice recorder beside it. The Forest Service declared it a case of abandonment of post. The official report cited psychological stress and possible psychosis resulting from isolation. They assigned me to take over the empty post. I'd been a ranger in Yellowstone for 5 years, and the promotion to a more remote independent station was meant to be a reward for excellent service. My supervisor warned me that the previous ranger had gone a bit strange before disappearing, but assured me there was nothing to worry about. Happens sometimes in these isolated posts, he said. Some people aren't cut out for the solitude. I moved into the cabin 2 weeks ago. It's comfortable, well-maintained. From the east-facing porch I can see the sun rise over mountains every morning. It's the kind of postcard view tourists drive hundreds of miles to see. But something feels different here. At first I didn't notice anything unusual, just the normal sounds of the forest, the rhythm of days that comes with ranger work. But then I found the journal hidden inside a hollowed-out book on the shelf. It detailed everything: the silence, the circles of dead vegetation, the missing hikers, the entity from another reality. I should have reported it immediately, turned it in as evidence in the missing ranger case, but something compelled me to keep reading, to keep the journal to myself. Last night, I woke at exactly 3 a.m. to a sound so faint I initially thought I was imagining it, a low, rhythmic humming, almost like chanting, vibrating in my chest rather than my ears. This morning, as I patrolled the northern ridge overlooking Blackwater Lake, I noticed something strange. No birds, not a single chirp or call. The forest was completely silent. And for a brief moment, I thought I saw a shimmer in the air, about 50 yards away, like heat rising from pavement on a summer day. When I returned to the cabin this evening, I found something small and metallic partially buried under some leaves on the porch. A silver pendant with an intricate design, a circle containing what looked like a stylized tree, but with branches that twisted in anatomically impossible ways. I haven't touched it yet, but I know I will. The humming is getting louder. The forest is calling. And somewhere in these woods, I know the previous ranger is waiting for me, for all of us, at the thin place between worlds. I think I'll head toward Blackwater Lake tomorrow. There's something I need to see there. Can you hear it too? That humming? It's beautiful, isn't it?